This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics. The content is of an adult nature and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licence podcast. I'm Shauna and I'm in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
I'm Leo in London.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here. Echolalia.
Echolalia.
Well, you said no then I said no then.
Echolalia.
That is Echolalia. And
Echolalia.
we have been, not going to comment, noticing how frequent I do that kind of thing when it's not piss taking, like, which sometimes it can sound like. It could sound like I'm just repeating something because your accent is different than mine. Mm-hmm. But it's not. It's actually Echolalia.
You know what I'm going to do?
You're going to either do a definition of Echolalia or
ask sneakily ask you for one in a very subtle, non-pressurised way.
Not so subtle kind of a way. So I'm going to opt out of that because I don't like doing that kind of job.
That's no problem. I'm going to Google it.
No, just say it off the top of your head.
Echolalia, but I don't necessarily have a good clinical definition or an understanding of it. But what I understand it as a behaviour is the echo part, is to repeat something either that you've just heard, or it could be, I think, and you tell me, there might be a phrase that's in your head from somewhere that you might loop.
That's right. And words from songs, which is very common in the non-autistic community as well. But in effect, that is
I suppose an earworm could be a version as well, couldn't it? Especially if definitely has happened to me and has happened actually in the last couple of days, where it just might be one line or phrase from a song that just seems to loop, and that can go on for days. In my head, I wouldn't necessarily, probably I would externalise it actually.
Well, you did, and it's quite an embarrassing example that you've just volunteered to share.
Have I? Yeah. I know it was Christina Aguilera and I can't remember.
Well, you told me, you first of all said it was Britney Spears and then told me the line and I was like, it's not even Britney Spears.
That's Christina Aguilera, which then led me back to Hit Me Baby One More Time, which then started looping in my head. So I did do both in the end.
Okay.
But I actually can't remember now, which is interesting considering the tens of thousands of times it went round in my head for 48 hours, what the bit from Christina Aguilera was.
No, I don't know.
Because it's been overtaken by Britney now.
By Britney now. Okay, so looping back, because that's not the type of echolalia that we are noticing in my speech is the type that repeats back the words that you've just said by way of joining and connection, actually.
That's one of the things we were saying when we were out and about in town yesterday and we noticed it happening, that sometimes for you were bringing back something that was quite just delicious to say.
A word.
Just in the... either the structure of the words or the sound or the vowels, the roundedness, all kinds of things can make something you just wanted to say it again.
Because you had got to say it. I think that's what I said. Like, you got to say that word and then I couldn't not also have a go at saying the word. And then, yes, there's that. But there's also like a choice to repeat the words rather than to just make a kind of a acknowledging statement like yes or or something like that. It's like repeating back the words feels more connecting. If you showed me something out the window, which I think was an example of this, and you said it in words, look at that such
little
and
church.
such tiny little church,
Maybe.
tiny little church, something like that. And instead of me just going, oh yeah, which would be like,
yes,
that then you would see that I was following joint attention, it gets called, doesn't it? And sometimes children are assessed for that. Potentially autistic children are assessed for that. And it's like, do they do joint attention? So like, do they show you things? And it is seen to be pathological if they don't. So I guess that you were doing that and I was naturally following that. But instead of going, oh yeah, yes. I said tiny little church. And that was my way of communicating, yeah, I'm with you. Yes. And that's exactly what it is.
Yes.
And
now then, because we are two autistic people, we've got nothing really to compare that to. But I find when you do that rather than, oh yeah, it's way more connecting and it's way more satisfying. And even just there's a greater deal of warmth. Now, I can see how that might be received as I receive it in the way I've just described it there. Or I could see that it could be annoying. That I'm thinking about being a little kid and getting into that exact habit, but as a tease, that everything the other person says, you repeat the last few words and just to drive them nuts, to irritate them. So from that point of view, it could be that, but it isn't that in my experience. I find it, as I say, it's very connecting and warm and affectionate even, and extra validating. It really, and we went on, didn't we, when this happened yesterday, and then we went on to talk about what that's like as therapists, because part of training is reflecting and mirroring and that kind of thing, where you're kind of trained to do that almost, which we didn't need. That comes very naturally to us.
But then I'm also remembering that we were trained in like that real rudimentary training at the start. It's best not to give it the exact words back, otherwise you sound like a parrot. So the better way is to, kind of give similar words back that show that you've heard, but that you're not just parroting. Yeah. And I remember there was so much nuance around that, because if you tried too hard, you actually lost the meaning of what the people had actually said. So there must have been like a balance there. And obviously, like so many years on, you don't really, I can't remember exactly, but I think in general, there was maybe some of those skills that at the beginning anyway, would have been very natural, because as autistic people, we like to jump right in and be present with a person. Like we're like that, and that can sometimes be a product of camouflaging, masking all our lives. And, then we really do feel and sense, or we want to, and in the process of trying to, we say the words. I think that might be like an aim to it. And that might also be where we're not necessarily, we process in a very kind of seem to be slower kind of way. So we're not then thinking, what can I say next, and what can I say to bring that person on from tiny little church. I was able to just go tiny little church. So like, I'm with you with tiny little church, as opposed to thinking, okay, Leo's made that point that it's a tiny little church. I need to notice something else and contribute to this conversation by saying, oh, it's a what and what church, or oh, there's a sign for a car boot sale, or oh, there's, I didn't do any of that, but I can imagine that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when I'm in conversations or when I'm around conversations with non-autistic people, that then leads to me feeling completely lost because they move so fast. So I'm still with the tiny little church, and someone has gone into, and it's a this type of church, and it's this, and someone springs off that, and someone springs off that, and I think I can't keep up. Like, I just, and that's often then obviously pathologized out in the real world, as it is like the autistic person then refers back to the fact it's a small church and everyone else has moved and springboarded off that, but actually maybe hasn't really sensed into the feeling on the sense that the first person was saying of what it was, because conversation just moves so quickly for many, many people that aren't like me, is all I can say.
Yeah. And that idea that you were just talking about of being slower in processing and maybe not being able to move with the conversational flow when it's other people in the real stroke neurotypical world. But I don't think that comes up in the therapy room, though, because the pace doesn't necessarily accelerate in that way. But also, even if it does, and we end up bringing somebody back a little bit with our echoing of a particular phrase, that's almost always a good thing or useful.
Therapeutically, it can be.
And when I was saying earlier, and I know you wanted to then qualify it, that, we were very good at that in our individual trainings, what I really meant was that just comes naturally to us because it's what we do.
Okay.
And it happens to be very therapeutically useful as a skill. We didn't have to learn it.
Okay. Like not racing on.
Absolutely.
And really
or doing the
sensing the thing as it is and just staying with the person as they are then, rather than taking it further or... Yeah. I think that's the point, isn't it? Like staying with the person rather than trying to take them on or leading them further or reflecting back, but not in the same words. So then, which I think that there's definitely merit in that if it's going to sound like parroting, but maybe that's a neurotypical take on it, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is.
We might not see it in that, we might not experience in that way. And actually...
I don't think our clients do.
Well, autistic clients, but we don't know if non-autistic clients might, as you just said, be annoyed by that or think that you're somehow like... I mean, I know you didn't say... Well, you said about being annoying. So perhaps for non-autistic people, that could be experienced as somewhat annoying and like, who is this therapist? Like, why are they just repeating my words back to me? Yeah,
but that isn't...
That's not what we're doing. It's not a repeating. It's not a skill-based repeating back of words. It's a sensing into your reality.
Yes.
That in autistic to autistic communication can come out in that echo, not only of the words, but I think also the intonation. And that's where...
So you're hitting on something I was going to come to a bit later. Yes, go on.
See, you planned in advance what you were going to say. That's kind of going against
the whole thing. No, but what I do, though, is that I will have thoughts and I will park them in a little queue. And when the moment comes, which isn't yet, I may bring them forward. But I hear what you're saying.
I don't have a queue.
No.
That's not how that's different. I know you do that, and whenever you've got like paper or whatever, I know you don't use paper, but whenever you've got like some kind of device in front of you to note it, you will note those kind of things and find a way to bring them back in. That's not the way that my internal processing works.
I have to do that, and I will occasionally do that when I'm working too, because this is the ADHD little flavour, is that I won't remember
Yeah.
It'll be too fast a connection and I'll lose it before I can use it. I didn't mean to rhyme.
Lose it before you use it. Okay. So can we find our way back to where we were?
Well,
the intonation.
We were talking about
word.
the intonation, but also to rewind back a little bit further, as in, you know, what the definition is. We've talked about quite meaningful ways that echolalia works for us, and having Googled a definition, one thing that's actually quite upsetting to see, and this is a psychiatric definition, is meaningless repetition.
That's right. That is,
and
how
I don't know that it ever is. Is it? You know, there's meaningless. Maybe they mean in terms of a two-way communication,
but not autistic to autistic.
But it's not.
Communication.
No, absolutely, it's not though, is it? It's not meaningless, and we've just described an actual experience of it from both ends that happened yesterday. That wasn't meaningless for either of us.
No, but this is why they pathologize. That's it a neurotypical.
Absolutely. Let me read it out because it's one short sentence. The meaningless repetition of words just spoken by another person occurring as a symptom of mental conditions. Isn't that lovely?
Okay, but with children,
this is the next one. Repetition of speech by a child learning to talk.
That's right. And with children, they would pick up on that as a potential, what they see as red flag for autism. It could be white flag for autism. Yay!
Green light.
Congratulations, you're autistic. And I remember, we've been playing with this for a few weeks now. But I told you that one of the things that was said to me with concern about my child when she was around 3 was that she was being asked in like a preschool setting whether she wanted to drink milk or water, and they were going round the children and saying milk or water, and instead of making a choice, Lana would repeat back milk or water in exactly the same way as she had been told it. And they saw this as a concern because she wasn't responding. It wasn't. She was actually responding.
She really was.
She was empathising with what they were asking.
Yes.
And in actual fact, she didn't want either. And I know that because I know she didn't like sitting at a table with other children, which was obviously another sign that they didn't like. And she only liked to drink out of her own water bottle with her own water in it. And so to ask a child like that, do you want a cup of milk or water, which is what they were offering, she didn't want either. But she was actually responding to them. There was a communication. She didn't simply run away, or she responded by saying the words back. But that's that sense of, to them, that would have looked meaningless because it didn't answer.
It didn't interact with the meaning that they were
wanted
trying to convey.
Which jug do you want me to use, or how do you? And it did kind of look meaningless. So I can see how, from a neurotypical point of view, what we do. And then there's also that bringing in the intonation, because I know that even as a child, she would also do the intonation. It wasn't just saying milk or water, it was saying it in the way that they did it, with a question mark at the end. And like that is the aspect that whenever we were puzzling about this, and it's only been a few weeks, even though it's probably been going on for a lot longer, we were distinguishing it from, like, am I repeating your words because you've got a different accent to me? You know, and therefore is there a teasing element, or even just a, like, let me do your accent to see how that feels like in my mouth, and which could be part of it.
Yes, that feels.
And that does happen. Actually, that does happen. And then like clarifying. Now, there are sometimes, I mean, at the very beginning of this recording, coincidentally, you were doing my accent of saying Echolalia. So that definitely happens in just the way that oftentimes two people with different accents will occasionally speak in each other's accent or repeat it back because it's a new way of saying a thing or a different way of saying a thing. And whenever you have turns of phrase that I don't have, I'll like try them out, won't I? And there may be, and I guess the surface level of that is to see it in a kind of a teasing, joking kind of way. And while there's some elements of that, what we've realised is it's mostly not that. It is about how does that feel when I say it, which is much more of an enjoyment of words and language and sounds, and also a joining and an empathic.
But that's,
thing.
Yes. So
we've realised that, haven't we? Rather
that's
than
absolutely
that
right. And I know from my vast life experience that I pick up accents really easily and totally out of awareness. And that can seem incredibly pretentious, that suddenly you've got a slight Australian accent because you're hanging around with loads of Australians. And that's happened to me before. And I will also pick up the things that are different. I've caught myself this very weekend while I've been with you here in Northern Ireland of saying, will I or will we instead of shall we, for example.
Oh, yeah.
We went for a walk yesterday and there was a little bit of nice view and I asked if we should do a little selfie there. And I said, will we do a selfie? I remember catching myself at the time, not shall we. And I wouldn't say that.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice that, of course, because I'm used to will.
So there's of course, exactly. So, but I think to somebody I know, hearing me speak outside of my own speech patterns and suddenly very much into one of yours would seem really pretentious or really, what's the word, sucking up to, desperately seeking validation but I think there is part of that that's involved there, which is allied to, but a little bit more conscious than masking, which is, the behaviour is I'm trying to be like you. Now, normally that means I'm trying to be neurotypical. And that's where it's not great for us and uses up lots of energy and takes us toward burnout. But there is another, as I say, it's that thing about picking up not just accent, but as you say, inflections, everything.
This is true. And yes, and it then shows up as being extremely useful later on. And
one of those ways that it was useful is because I have a little bit of a background in this kind of thing of speaking for, radio and that kind of thing. Somebody I knew heard that there was a TV production that needed somebody who could do accents and recommended me. And I ended up doing these voiceovers for this Channel 4 series where a well-known British band would, each week it'd be a different one, and they would play a secret hometown gig.
Yeah.
And what they would do is for the title sequence, it was called Vodafone TBA, by the way, the series. So Snow Patrol would have played like Dundee. There was a band in Liverpool. There were a number of them. And the title sequence for each of these episodes was shots, aerial shots of the city, all cross-cut, blah, blah, blah. And the sound of a radio being tuned from station to station and a DJ or presenter on each of the different stations from that city announcing that there was going to be a secret gig in town that night by this band, whoever it was. And so I was basically employed to read out the scripts of these little snippets of different, supposedly different radio presenters, in the accents of these towns. I've never done anything like that professionally before, but it was dead easy. I just remember that the most difficult one, although the accent I'd always found the most difficult to kind of get my lips around was Scouse, was Liverpudlian. And that's one of the ones I had to do. But not only that, the producer had brought in his best mate from Liverpool to sit in the control room while I did it. I didn't know it at first, and then he was introduced to me, and then I kind of went, but apparently it was fine. But there you go. So I was able to use, and it was echolalia, because what I would do is I would listen to a bunch of stuff that I could find in that accent and just start repeating. And it's just, that's easy to me. This is more about language. Like I find that picking up spoken foreign language relatively easy in the most basic way. So when I've spent time in France or Germany, I can fairly quickly just follow the gist of conversations and sometimes butt in with a little response. As soon as it's written down, I'm totally lost. And obviously at any level of sophistication, I can't do it. But it's not because I'm clever. It's because I think I've got more pathways available, or I am more open-minded. I don't shut down because, I'm not going to understand this. And I think that's a particularly, I'm going to say culturally, it's a particularly English thing as well, to be very self-conscious of speaking in another language. But it's something I've never understood, that when one hears a phrase in French, and then you repeat it back, if you're English, that more often than not, you say it with an English accent. And I never understood that. Why have you changed what you've heard? Why have you changed what you've heard into something that sounds different? Why can't you just repeat exactly what you heard like you would with anything in your own language? Why does the fact that it's in another language mean that you apply different sounds to it with your accent? That doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make sense to you, but it's what...
Because we can do an impression of that, can't we? We can all do an impression, if you give me a French phrase, of what that would sound like with a very, very heavy English accent on it.
But I think that it's you... But most people, what they think that they're saying back is the same as what the person has said.
No, I don't think so. I really don't.
Is that not why in school?
I think it's self-consciousness for some reason, but I still don't understand why you would hear a thing and then say it differently. I don't really understand. I suppose what I'm saying is I don't really understand what accents are. In their, I'm fascinated. And England is such a great example of that, because you can travel 15 miles in some parts of the country and cross a county border and have completely different accent.
Okay, you are losing me.
I know, sorry.
Far too many
branches.
And branches. So, something that I was thinking was that you can hear music in the same way, and you can teach yourself how to play an instrument.
Oh, that's another thing. Yeah, we haven't actually touched on that I play everything by ear.
You play everything by ear. So that is similar to how you'll hear a French person talking. Whereas someone else might learn sheet music and
very good.
Playing it that way.
Very good analogy.
Okay.
Very good.
So, and for me, I can still understand written French really well, because I was taught it.
That's how you learned it.
That's how I learned it. Now, of course, I did orals and that in school as well. And I, if I listen carefully, I will, I'll understand more than I'll be able to speak. I'm interested in what you say, that maybe that's a confidence thing. And I think definitely whenever we're young people and we're speaking out and we're being asked in class to speak in the foreign language, there is definitely a self-conscious aspect to that, which would be very different than whenever we're sitting, writing something down or working something out in that way. So I can see that. And I can also see that it's similar to that whole music thing, that some people learn by ear, and some people learn
academically
in a different
theory,
a different way.
That's it.
And that's not necessarily an autistic thing. However, I can also see that you're saying about the different pathways being open and available, and also maybe for autistic people not maybe not having the same self-consciousness sometimes, or just opting out of some of that, as actually you did. School was quite overwhelming, you weren't understood, so you felt into what you could do well, and you did it your way. And that kind of worked together in that.
I know that a lot of my autistic repetitious behaviours of all kinds, are very, very consistent. Another example I gave in my assessment was that, I have my standard breakfast, which long-time listeners know all about, of my cream crackers and peanut butter and coffee. But my fantasy was that if there was like a wall-mounted camera that filmed me preparing that every day for 3 years, and then you could do a multi-screen playback, they would just be exactly mirrored. I'm pretty sure of it. It's so consistent. That isn't obviously verbal. That's a physical behavior, but it does feel similar in that I'm reaffirming something each time by doing it the same.
That's a repetitive behaviour.
It's a repetitive,
old style.
An echolalia is partly a version of a comforting repetitive behaviour.
Then is it a stim? Because that's
Brilliant.
That's the other thing that connects with so-called repetitive behaviour is basically stimming, which can be echolalia because we stim on those words.
Definitely.
If you say a nice word and I want to say it myself, I'll say it back.
Yes.
Or that's the thing with the tunes or the songs or the dance moves or any of that's stimming, and it's highly enjoyable.
Definitely feels immediately like much more like a stim than any of the other things that we've talked about. It is that affirming communication, and when it's autistic to autistic, then it is definitely an affirming relational communication that feels lovely for both people, I think.
Yes.
But in terms of that, when you get the little delicious phrase and you just want to turn it around, and it is like holding an object, isn't it? And kind of rotating it in your hand and feeling all the different facets.
Is it, or for me, is it more like, whenever even we talked about food, and we talked about oral sensitivities, and we talked about other ones, and I'm actually thinking when I say a word that I like, I feel it in my mouth. I don't feel it in my hand. So what you're trying to say there about feeling all of it, it's actually in my mouth that I feel that.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I was making an analogy there.
The movement of forming the syllables in my mouth. And that's really interesting because, obviously, whenever we get kind of people try and understand autistics in all different ways and through all different lenses, but all of these different uses of your senses, and you might say that I'm orally defensive because I won't allow certain flavours in, or all these things that are used to pathologise the way that we are, but also there's something that's super sensitive in that, and also like enjoyable, but could be overstimulating. Yes, in food, but yes, in lots of other things. If I'm so delighted with language and with words and with all of that, then that could lead to what some people looking on would see as hyperactivity, and tone that down.
Absolutely, yes.
Please just give it a rest. It's just a word, and it's that kind of where we come across in this annoying, hyper, like, well, why is that a big deal? Like, really? But it actually, there is a pleasure in it. And that fits with stimming, because this is why children are often, people try and control them not to stim and, not to move in that way. It'll draw attention to yourself. Really, why are you flapping? It's just, you just, it's going to be an exciting show. So, but you don't need to flap like that. And something about where it's uncomfortable for the people looking on, but actually the way that we experience all of these things, the pleasure comes out in these ways.
And that's the intensity of autistic joy as well. And
Yes.
I had such a wave of sadness as you described that, and just thinking of not necessarily me even, but just a small child who's experiencing that level of joy and being chastised for it. It actually has brought a tear to my eye. You know, it's so opposite, as so many of these things are. The reaction to the behaviour is so opposite to the cause of the behaviour. You know, this is not somebody who's overexcited or inappropriately overstimulated. It's somebody expressing absolute joy and really getting actually a lot of comfort and chilledness even, you know, out of that behaviour. And what they're told is that their energy is up when actually they're doing something that's keeping their energy very level and comfortable.
Yeah, good point. That one as well. Well, or do we know? Like, could it be keeping it up? But actually, that's just really pleasurable.
All I know is my own experience, of course. I'm not. Yeah, I shouldn't be imposing that on anyone else.
Yeah, we don't totally know that, but obviously, it's very misunderstood by the people watching, and the people watching might be concerned. Oh my goodness, if it's like this now, I need to try and tone that down, because when they actually go into, and I am creating a hypothetical situation of, well, if they're this excited when they're watching TV, I can never actually take them to this place because they might totally lose it. And I, you know, and that's true in the sense that I know that for me, I will avoid things because of the come down. So we've talked about that before. So there's some sense, I guess, for parents who recognise that their child is so super sensitive that they can get so much enjoyment out of, you know, something that might seem so small to a neurotypical person looking on, that you don't want to take that child to something that will be too much. So I wouldn't want to take myself to something that would be too much. And I like to keep things on a very even keel. So because of our nervous system, there is a very real need for regulation, but if it can be seen in that affirming way as opposed to this is embarrassing way. And I think that unfortunately, and that's all the ABA stuff, the PBS stuff, you know, that actually this is an embarrassing thing that you're doing there, and somehow we need to stop you doing it because it marks you out as weird, rather than, oh, you're really enjoying that, how can I facilitate for you to enjoy it, and maybe if it gets too much, not, you know, help you to not have it be too much.
I just had to remind myself again by looking something up of the origins of a thing, which is that there's this literary phenomena which is about a little over 100 years old. What the Americans call a basement, we call a cellar. And the door to that room would be a cellar door.
Yes.
And cellar door is been recognised as the most beautiful sounding phrase in the English language.
Cellar door? Okay.
There's been some surveys, but it's been referenced by lots and lots of writers over the last 100 years for some reason.
Cellar door.
There we go. I just thought it would be a lovely example of playing with something really on purpose.
Cellar door. It doesn't do anything for me. Now, dusk is purring very close to my mind.
Excellent.
So there might be a little treat. Remember the last time this happened, and it was Phoebe.
And we looped it at the end.
And we looped it. Dusk has got a quieter purr than Phoebe. But yeah, we'll see. She's snuggled up here.
So the reason that what might be useful about that is the word I've just learned as I've been looking that up, euphony, which is the opposite of cacophony. So cacophony being an unbearable sound, a chaos of sound.
Yes, euphony.
Euphony is the effect of sounds being perceived as pleasant, rhythmical, lyrical, or harmonious.
How do you spell euphony?
EUPHONY.
Euphony? What's an euphony?
As in euphoric. as in, yeah.
But this is an phony, so sound.
Phony
for
sound, and you as in euphoric, yeah.
Euphony.
Same as consonance and dissonance.
Yes,
things that go together and feel lovely, and feel things that feel that they really should not be together, and they work against each other in our...
I like that, euphony.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? So I think that's what we were describing at the beginning as part of what might drive certain instances of echolalia, is that just intensely pleasing, could be mouth feel of saying the word, but it can also, I guess, be the sound that we make when we say it, and we want to hear or feel that resonate around in our senses.
That's right. And then that also, it brings up that thing of like, do I hear myself the same way as you hear yourself? So I say it out. And is it really about, I mean, obviously part of it is joining, connecting with you, but there's also like, how does that sound inside me? How does that reverberate around my ears when I hear me say it rather than you say it? So I hear it internal rather than external?
You hear it through your ears, as I do, but you also hear it in the vibrations of your jaw.
That's right.
That makes a difference, doesn't it? And that's why so many people can't bear to hear themselves recorded and played back, because it's not familiar at all. I enjoy it because I've done it lots throughout my life, recorded and played back. So I'm used to it. But I think that, if you're not used to it, it's always going to sound weird, because you're not hearing it. You're not hearing the vibrations of your jaw, etc. There's a word for that, and I can't remember what it is.
Is that what my,
the jaw phone here?
Yeah, those
exactly.
Ones.
So
what are they called? Aftershock?
Yeah, they're just shocks.
No, they're aftershock. Oh,
they're called shocks. That is a brand name, but so you will get some actual sound out of them, but primarily they're going to vibrate.
It's so cool.
The bones of your jaw. And
I like that much better.
Me too. Yeah, I used to use those when I was running.
Yeah.
So that I could also hear the world at the same time.
But also you just don't have to have something in your ear.
In your ear, exactly.
Which I don't like at all.
I was going on to something else. Let's see if I can backtrack a little bit. The feel of words, the familiarity. Another thing I've seen a few memes created about. This is the lovely thing about memes on social media that are very particular to your own seemingly unique experience of life, particularly as an autistic person, is when people talk about the thing that they do, and you go, first of all, you might go, oh, I didn't know that was an autistic thing, or you just go, oh, I thought I was the only person who did that. This isn't one of those. This is one that's kind of quite stereotypical, but the idea of hearing a song, and, in the days when you would buy a physical CD or a record or whatever, but just listening to it over and over and over and over and over again. And I know I've done that many times, and driven my family absolutely nuts with having to hear the same song, or sometimes album, just constantly on repeat.
Yes.
And I can think of a number of examples of that ruined it. So for example, as not a silly kiddie song, but the album Computer World by Kraftwerk, which came out in 1981, is a really well-respected piece of electronic music that lots of people obsess over. I certainly do. But I ruined it for my dad particularly, who really liked it, and we went to see them play then. But he can't listen to it even now. It drives him nuts, because I just had it over, and for weeks probably, I would imagine, knowing me. And that was the other thing about dissonance. So there's something... I'm going to put a link to a very old episode of another podcast, Radio Lab, from WNYC in America. They did a really good piece on, there was a lot, but there was a neurological bit about unfamiliar sounds.
Okay.
And the development of music. And there's a really great story now. I'm not going to repeat it all, but do go and have a listen. I'll put the time code in for that particular bit in the show notes, about Stravinsky's Rites of Spring piece of music, which starts kind of quite gently and pastoral, and it's lovely, but it builds quite quickly into this very jarring, dissonant chord, which is aggressive, and it just repeats in this pattern. And it was something that people had not heard before.
Okay.
And at the premiere of this piece, the first performance of this piece, the crowd rioted. Actually violently rioted, and people were hurt.
Yes.
And Stravinsky had to make an escape.
Yeah.
So that they didn't tear him to pieces. And there is this kind of, well, at the time, this is a 10-year-old episode, I think, but at the time there was some kind of ongoing neurological theorizing, about how neurons in the brain cannot cope with unfamiliar patterns, and so they can absolutely spark blind rage, a very amygdala traumatic response.
Yes.
But it turned out to be it became a popular piece of music, and it was performed again in the same theatre, presumably in front of many of the same people, perhaps. 1 year later, and he was carried out on their shoulders at the end.
Okay.
Because the people who'd become familiar with that piece had become familiar with that sound, and the neurons in their brain were not behaving in the way that they were when it was totally unfamiliar. And I can see that. You can see that in people I know, because I'm very, very interested in music. It's a massive, maybe the biggest part of my life. I'm very curious, and I like to hear things that are new and even disturbing. And I will almost consciously say, how might I get used to this? Might this is really horrible to my ears. I wonder if it will become quite nice one day. And that's like an experiment almost that's quite satisfying. But if there's certain bits of or types of music, particularly anything modern jazzy.
Yes.
And that can mean lots of things, obviously, which people around me, my wife, but also I think particularly of my mum, will actually go into a rage if they hear it for too long. They'll start shouting. It's not just, I'm really annoyed, why don't you stop? There's something almost uncontrollable.
Okay, yes.
And I can see that happening. So when I heard this story about the rites of spring, that made so much sense. Oh, there is actually stuff going on in your brain.
And I am really, really fascinated with the things that you're saying. And then I'm also just thinking in a general way, like generations don't understand each other's music.
Exactly that. That's exactly it. Yes, of course.
So many parents will be like, how can you listen to that shit?
Yes.
Like, because that's,
I often fantasize about that. I might be listening to what to me is a completely mainstream piece of music, and I will fantasize, I wonder what this would be like if I could take this back to 1920 and play it to some, composers, musicians, jazz music, people who were at the cutting edge then. I wonder how many of them were, here's a thought. This is what I end up thinking. I wonder how many of them would be interested and be able to engage in it, and I'll bet those are the autistic ones or ADHD.
And that was what was going through my head whenever.
Yes.
Okay. Can you hold whatever?
Yes, I can. I've got the phrase in my head.
That was what was going through my head whenever you were talking about the reaction of the people in the concert. Like, is that what is often observed of an autistic child as being overstimulation, and then over time we kind of, we've got used to things. Now we may have learnt how to dissociate a bit or mask, because that's why whenever, like, oftentimes it can seem like things are more intense after we're self-identifying or self-diagnosing. We're like, well, why did this not bother me 20 years ago? And then the thing is, well, probably because I had particular strategies that I had to learn over the years in order to survive, so that I just wasn't really, for me anyway, like wasn't really present in life because it was so overstimulating. And so it might have looked like I wasn't, it might have looked like I was no longer stimulated, but it was actually because I was no longer present. And so then I start to become more present again to life, and then I start to feel the overstimulation. So potentially what is seen in autistic children could be similar to what is seen in those people at that concert. Mm-hmm. And then there's an adaptation. But I guess my musings about it are that for non-autistic people, that adaptation is not so traumatic. But for autistic people, if it's you need to make so many adjustments to survive in the world, that turns into a traumatic response. Whereas if it's, and I'm going to say just in inverted commas because everybody's on some kind of a spectrum with all of these sensory issues, but maybe for non-autistic people, they can adapt, and maybe like in non-autistic development, living as a neurotypical person in a neurotypical world, the plasticity in your brain adapts. Because obviously an infant, a newborn, cannot cope with the same as a 10-year-old can cope with. You wouldn't take a newborn to a crazy amusement park. You do. Okay,
I'm not sure about this.
Let me continue. Let me continue, please.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My sense of it is that a newborn who has just been exposed to the world, that's why oftentimes newborns, non-autistic newborns even, will cry more than other children, and everything will be so intense. Now, this is dialed up a million times if you're autistic, but for non-autistic newborns, they don't have the capacity. Obviously, they can't deal with separation. Most of them will not like very, very, very loud, unexpected noises. Any infant needs security, safety, presence of a caregiver, a reliable, consistent caregiver, all of that. Then as they grow and develop and mature, and the synaptic pruning goes on,
that's where I was going.
And all of these natural developmental adjustments, because they are lucky enough to have been born into a world that is designed for their neurotype, then it's not a traumatic process. For an autistic person who is born as an infant, it's a traumatic process of adjustment because they need to actually, actively suppress, because there hasn't been a natural pruning. A natural pruning that fits with the world that they're born with. Because actually we would be better with a world that wasn't so stimulating. So like if we were in say there's a world, say the world does exist in 100 years, which it may not, we may have all combusted, but say it still exists in 100 years time, like most of us now, autistic or non-autistic, probably couldn't deal with the stimulation of it. But by the time that humans have evolved until then, the majority, whoever they are, and autistics may be the majority by then, I don't know, but whoever the majority is, that majority will be able to be born into that world and adjust to that world. And the ones who are not the majority will be the ones that are traumatised by their very existence in a world that's not designed for them. And I think that's all that I wanted to say.
That's all wonderful. It's all wonderful. And I what I love is some of what you said seemed counterintuitive to me, and I want to counter it. But it doesn't invalidate it at all.
Tell me the wonderful bits that you were reacting.
What you were saying about you wouldn't take a baby to something incredibly overstimulating, it would disturb them. And I don't know. It depends. I think what at that point maybe they're in their very limited experience used to. But for example, I think we've talked before about how it's only been extremely recent for me in my life that I can tolerate dark and quiet.
Yeah.
And for the majority of my life, I've had to be, to sleep, I've had to have some kind of light around me and some kind of noise. And, the roots of this have always been understood in my family, that when I was born, me and my mum and dad lived in a tiny, tiny little flat. So I was exposed to their noise and life and movement around the whole time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, it was the opposite of disturbing to me. It was the norm, and it was the comfort of knowing that there were people around.
Yes.
In fact, that made me feel very secure, to the point where I think the most relaxed I'd ever been in a domestic, well, it's not domestic, but, 24-hour environment, was when I lived in a hotel. I lived and worked in a Grand Metropolitan Hotel in Dubai in the mid-80s. And what I loved about it was that it was a 24-hour environment. If I woke up at 4 a.m, there were people around. I could go and visit friends of mine who were working in the hotel. That was just so comforting to me, to know that there was life. And it's also, I suppose, why at that point I would have always chosen to live in a city, which I always have done. I'm from London. Now I wouldn't. Now I would choose to live rurally in the quiet, because that's one part of it. That's one part of it, where there's something about my environment which meant, or partly my environment and partly because I'm autistic, I reckon, that I actually welcomed that kind of stimulation as a very young, very small human being. The other part then that I forked off on in my mind was the stuff about dissonance and sound, and why it's always been for me a very open book. I will absorb consonance, which I now know is the opposite of dissonance, and dissonance as well. They're both very stimulating and satisfying to me in completely different ways. And I was wondering if the lack of neural or synaptic pruning in my autistic brain meant that there are lots more pathways available for senses to come in and be processed. And therefore the bits that I would imagine, let's think about music and sound particularly. I imagine that whatever the mechanism and systems are for, I understand, my limited understanding of neural or synaptic pruning is that, it's about efficiency. Pathways that aren't used and we don't need get pruned away. Now, for whatever reason, call it a developmental disorder if you must, we don't experience that, or we don't experience it to the same extent as neurotypical people. Well, then there is space available for non-typical sensory experiences, like the jarring chord in the Rite of Spring, like modern jazz, like experimental electronic music, which I just love. It doesn't set off the amygdala because the pathways to receiving and processing them are open. I'm getting very excited by this thought.
With all the things that you're saying. Yeah.
So
it's true though.
So this is an absolute gift. This is, now I've really identified this with you and talking about the different versions of this with you. We were asked a while ago in some environment or other, if there was a pill to cure, big inverted commas, autism, would we take it? And I mean, absolutely not at the time, because it's so much inherently part of my personality. I don't wish it gone at all. But to think of the huge dominance that music and open-mindedness in that combination have played in my life so far, and I hope will continue forever. That really solidifies. That's such a gift to have those pathways still available to me so that I can absorb and process and enjoy. I mean, is that actually part of autistic joy? Is that why autistic joy is a phrase at all, that it's dialed up so much, is that we can absorb the pleasurable things multiply. Different pathways. Oh, isn't that wonderful?
It is wonderful.
I've moved myself with my narrative there.
It is wonderful, and it's why it's so utterly shocking with all the eugenics, research and, effectively moving towards, choice around whether you bring autistic people into the world or not.
And if you do ABA to sort it out.
That actually it's becoming more and more appreciated that most of are creatives in the world, are neurodivergent. Yeah. And that's absolutely enjoyed by... Yeah.
Well, hence the neurodiversity paradigm, isn't it? As allied to, or as a branch of, biodiversity. We don't want one kind of flower. And that's it for beauty in the world, you know. Yes. Apart from the practical side, that the more variety you have, you know, the more opportunities for survival and thriving that we have in the world.
Yeah.
But yes, that the idea that actually that's only just occurring to me as we speak, that so much of my enjoyment of sound and music, which is the absolute core of me, is because I have the brain that I have, and that it's an autistic brain. Even if you just look at it from a neurological point of view and what we understand so far, that still gives me intense pleasure.
And that's the point as well. This is not about saying we need autistic people because they're so talented and they can offer to the world.
Yes.
This is just
fuck other people. This is for me.
Your own experiencing as an autistic person. I think that's what's so rarely understood, that there are certain heights of experience available to neurodivergent people that may not be available to neurotypical people. And that is not something that a lot of non-autistic people have ever countered. Is that the right word? Countered?
Yeah, encountered.
No, but also countenance.
Oh, I see.
Countenance.
Yes. Well, okay.
Allowed.
Yes.
Allowed themselves to imagine that actually these poor autistic people who are so inferior to themselves might actually experience a kind of a joie de vivre, you know.
And please hold on to that phrase, because that is so important. You've just made me think of something quite wonderful, which is about, I said, fuck other people just then. This is for me. This is how my brain, my neurology and everything around my personality that's developed around it pleases me and gives me pleasure. But the idea of autistic joy, and I'm sure we've both experienced this, is how we actually sometimes get to transmit that to other people. And it is a joyous thing. And I'm just working out, just looking something up. Okay. So there is this TikToker, Instagrammer guy, it's not his real name, he's Francis Bourgeois, and he's a train spotter. I don't know if you've ever seen him. He's been on TV, he's had a little series on Channel 4. He is wonderful, and he really exploded in lockdown when people were in need of distraction and stimulation, but also some joy. Yeah. So he is somebody that will film himself reacting with intense excitement and joy to seeing locomotives, you know, to doing his training. It's wonderful. I'll show you some after this. And again, link in the description to this, link to the Radio Lab episode in this, link to also, very importantly, because we mentioned ABA a couple of times, I'll find a good critical article that supports our point about ABA and also again, we've done it before, but something around neural pruning or synaptic pruning, and
PBS as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Positive behavioural support, which is the other one that in the UK it sounds so innocuous, but it's actually a derivative of ABA, and many of our special schools are using PBS, and it's got so much so much traction and so much credibility when actually it's just about changing the behaviour of autistic people to make them seem less autistic. So, that was a wee bit of a tangent. So please go back to your train.
Yes.
Stuff.
So Francis Bourgeois, he took off because, and I heard of him because a couple of podcasters were talking about him and the pure joy that ordinary, regular, typical, neurotypical people, everybody was, you know, the joy was so infectious. It was not contained. Now I was just looking at some of his biography. I don't see any reference to autism, and obviously we'd be pandering to a terrible male stereotype that all train spotters are autistic. But, you know, who knows? I don't know. And I'm not saying that he is or he isn't, but certainly I relate to that level of joy. That is the kind of joy I would get from the things that give me joy, that are that intense, that to many people look put on, exaggerated. He's had a great deal of criticism from big chunks of the train spotting community who see him as a self-publicist and also just exaggerate performance, that it's performing, and it clearly isn't. I do not believe for a moment that any of that is anything but incredibly genuine. Yeah. And he's done some wonderful stuff. The little shorts he did for Channel 4 I will also link to, because they're important. There's a lot about mental health in there also.
Okay. Yeah. Where else did I want to go? I had this memory of, do you remember the first time you saw a train here? And you're like, you have different trains.
Yes.
Yeah, we have different trains, Leo. But I did also, like, I might have said that, but I was also like, there was an affection as part of it. Yeah, so that came into my mind, but I think I was going to go off from that, but just don't quite know how to right now. And then the other thing that stuck with me was this image of the baby in the fairground that I had, and I guess wanting to say that it's very different. And my sense of things would be, it's very different for a baby to be in their own home environment with familiar, repetitive sounds of their parents and of the neighbours.
Good point.
Than being in a chaotic, unpredictable fairground where there's strange voices and strange accents and, strange smells and lights and everything being different. That I really, and this may or may not be a controversial statement, and I know that sometimes I can be very opinionated about these kinds of things. I just cannot see that would not be a challenge to any infant's nervous system, regardless of whether they're autistic or not. That's very hard for me, actually. And this actually really may not stay in, but I need to say it, and I know it can sound very judgmental, but my understanding is that an infant needs to be shielded, and that the ones that appear to be good in those environments or have their nervous system has the wisdom to shut them down and put them to sleep is not actually good at all. It's overstimulation and you're
saying that that's a traumatic response rather than aren't they good, they can sleep through anything.
So often it's seen as, haven't you just got a great baby, you can take them anywhere, and you put them in their buggy and they'll fall asleep for 4 hours and you get to do whatever you want. And it's probably the most adaptive response to that scenario. But I have difficulties with the idea that that's not putting a strain on that any baby's nervous system to be in that kind of cacophony.
Cacophony.
And that's absolutely not saying that a household that has hoovers and predictable sounds going is not a good thing. It is a good thing. It is. It's more that making a distinction between all of those predictable everyday sounds and alarming cacophonies of sound and stimulation.
Coping mechanisms then, I suppose,
that are not developed. They're just not developed at that stage. You don't have the capacity to adapt in lots of ways, Can you find a way to wind us up for ending this episode that began with Echolalia? Echolalia.
I've already thought of. I've already thought of that as an ending. Whatever word we end with, I will put a delay on.
No, I've just done it. Sorry.
I have a thumb drive or memory stick, however you want to call it, that's filled with a very early podcast from podcasts are 20 years old. I think it's this year even.
Well,
I think 2004 was the first time that I ever listened to podcasts.
I didn't. I don't think I'd ever heard of them.
And this was just, a music edited out version of a 3-hour radio show that I really liked, with 2 presenters that I really liked. And they did many, many episodes, and I downloaded all of them. And I had them on I still do have them on a memory stick that I used to carry around with me. So we talked about German language before, and being Germany, I worked in Germany for a little while, for a few months at that time. And that was one of my comforts. Was listening to those podcasts that were familiar to me, that I'd heard many times.
Yeah.
That I knew the words that were coming. The same with music. We've talked before, and this is now 40 years ago this year, 1984, that I was working as a musician
in the Grand Metropolitan
Hotel in Dubai.
In Dubai, where there was 24-hour activity in the kitchen,
we're looping
which
back
was
to
so
that.
soothing.
And there I had a couple of music albums and some comedy tapes, actually. Again, things that I just knew backwards. Mm-hmm. And that would be just so soothing. It's soothing to listen to soothing music. We understand what that's about. But for me, it wasn't just that it was soothing. It was that I knew exactly in the finest detail what was coming, and my brain could kind of just trot along with it.
Uh-huh.
There's a little fantasy, I suppose, about maybe there's episodes of our podcast that might be used in that way by some people. I think probably not.
We're quite unpredictable.
For reasons. Well, not if you've listened to 100 times, it's not. You could mouth along to it.
Okay.
Maybe there are people mouthing along to me saying, mouth along to it.
Well, they're probably mouthing along to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel in Dubai. Because I do.
Is that one of your... But is that a delicious phrase?
No, it's not. It's actually... What I wonder is, why do I have to know the name of the hotel? Why can't you just say when I was in Dubai? But you always say the name of it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that's the kind
because it's important to get the details right.
But actually, I don't need that detail. I know that it was a hotel in Dubai.
It's obviously nothing to do with your need, is it?
No,
to know. It's my need to be clear.
But I've been told it so many
detailed.
times that even if I didn't desire to retain that information, I have retained that information.
Yes. And now you're telling me to stop repeating myself.
Well, I don't know, because it's, I'm doing it in an affectionate way. I'm also noticing how things go into you, though, because when someone's telling me a story, I think that automatically I'll not retain that type of detail. I'll retain, the certain points of it. So I'll know it was Dubai, and I'll know it was when you were 17. But if every time that you say it, you name the hotel, that hotel will go in there in a way that I don't know any hotel's name that I've ever stayed in. You think we did not retain it?
Yeah. Is that a rounding off enough, do you think, that we could step away and say goodbye?
Yeah. Okay, that'll do. Yeah. It's better than we have been, or than our track record of ending these things without saying goodbye.
Sometimes it's we did round back to the beginning and talk about the repetition of words, which is where we came in with echolalia.
Okay. So
we'll speak to you next time.
We'll speak to you next time.
Bye-bye, Shauna.
Bye-bye, Leo. Bye-bye, lovely people.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook at autisticlicense.com, or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. And we spell license the British way, LICENCE. We also have a thriving Facebook community. Search for Autistic License Shauna and Leo, or click on the link in the show notes.